All right, welcome back to a bonus episode of the Blasters and Blades podcast. So, hey, all you crazy sci-fi and fantasy fans, time for your daily dose of shenanigans over here at the Blasters and Blades podcast. Just three nerdy veterans geeking out over our science fiction passions and fantastical fantasies, a place where magic is king, the sky is the limit, and space is the place. So, without further ado, let me tell you what we're doing right now. We're getting ready to release some of the archive that we found from when we were the sci-fi shenanigans. We're going to get those up there for the posts that were brought down. We thought you might enjoy them, and so without further ado, let us roll that beautiful. Oh wait, they're going to sue me. Play it.
Hey, all you crazy sci-fi fans. Time for your daily dose of insanity over here at the Sci-Fi Shenanigans podcast with your hosts, J.R. Handley and me, Chris Winder. Just two nerdy veterans geeking out over our science fiction passions. A place where the sky's the limit, space is the place, and nerds run the world. Without further ado.
All right, so thank you for coming back for part 2 of this interview. Today, we are going to talk to CJ Carella specifically about his novels, full-length novels. So if you are just catching this episode, I suggest that you listen to part 1, where he nerds out about all things role-playing game and all the stuff he's written or played. So, but let's move forward. How did your love of the genre of science fiction translate into writing novels specifically? You've obviously written RPG manuals, but how did you transition from that to full-length novels?
Well, I started as a frustrated novelist doing RPG supplements and eventually became a successful RPG writer that transitioned to fiction. My favorite part when writing role-playing game supplements was the little fiction color bits that you put at the beginning of chapters and whatnot.
So the world building source material?
Yeah. A lot of books have a little fiction blurb at opening chapters or at the beginning of a section, kind of to add some flavor text to the whole thing. So in effect, I ended up writing like hundreds of like flash fiction short stories in my books.
Okay. Now, when you write your RPGs, clearly that's published through traditional publishers. Are your novels self-published, or did you go through a publisher?
Well, starting out, I submitted to a few people. I got either no response or your typical boilerplate rejection slips. And I figured, actually, as I was writing, I figured, well, if I don't get an acceptance within a year of my having the book, I'm going to publish it myself. And that's what I did. And I didn't do too badly. So now it's become my full-time job.
Outstanding. Well, congratulations for being able to make that switch. So what do you think is your single largest influence on the novel writing specifically?
It's a tough one because I have more of a top 10 list. But if I have to say one name, I would say Stephen King, just for the dialogue and character development, especially in the first books. That's probably my biggest creative influence.
Okay. He has a lot of good things to say on the craft of writing and, just the horror stuff in general. So, yeah, I could see that, his dialogue. Let's see. For his writing, do you prefer the newer stuff or the older stuff?
Oh, older stuff. Yeah, I actually haven't read anything after. I think Bag of Bones was the last book I read of his.
I've heard someone describe it as his new stuff and old stuff might have almost been written by two different authors. They're so different from each other.
Yeah, I mean, I think his life experience, perhaps having been in that horrible accident where somebody ran him down with, I think, a van. I think that might have changed him, or maybe just, people change as they get older. But his stuff doesn't grab me anywhere near as much as the old stuff.
A lot of times when people change when they get older, the older stuff is the more compelling because they've got more life experience. But so it's interesting that you say the the stuff they write when they're older is more compelling. So it's interesting you like the stuff what he wrote when he was younger and hungry. So
Yeah,
it's
weird.
But hey, everyone's got their preferences, so don't hate a man for liking what he likes, even if you disagree. And so you've written many series, so I'm going to give a quick list for the listeners so we can all drool over them. He's written the Warp Marine series, the Beyond Wars series, the New Olympus Saga, and a Bad Vibes, which is a standalone novel. Today, we're going to try to focus on his Warp Marine stuff. So if you have an interest in him coming back to talk about his other written novels in the science fiction genre, send us a note. Our contact information will be in the show note, and we can certainly invite him back. But for today, we're going to focus on Warp Marine. So how did you come up with the premise for these series?
Well, I've always been a fan of military science fiction, starting with David Drake, Hammer Slammers. Later on, S.M. Stirling, John Ringo, and David Weber. So I've done quite a bit of reading along those lines. And the setting, it's kind of a weird story. It kind of came out from the original title. I wanted to call them the Marines something different than Space Marines.
Okay.
And so I was batting names around, and I came out, well, how about Warp Marines? And they, well, what does warp mean? And that led to a whole chain of questions, and that's how I got inspiration for how warp travel, warp space works, and so on and so forth. And that gave me the basic sort of like structure of the setting.
Okay.
Yeah, so it was kind of a weird situation there.
All right. So the Warp Marines is clearly a series because there's more than one written. So where do you see that series going? Are there going to be spin-off novels, graphic novels, or when you're finished with the series, are you going to write something else? Or are you going to keep it open-ended? What's your plan with the world?
Well, what I did with the War Marine Corps series was a 5-book self-contained story. So the 5th book, Havoc of War, is the final book of that particular series. My plan now is to later this year release the book 1 of a new related series called the Bicentennial War, and so that basically continue the same story, but it will be a separate series.
So it would be a new starting point if people haven't read the other 5.
Exactly.
That's smart. I wonder sometimes. I know the conventional wisdom is that series sell, but I wonder if you get to a point where the series gets so long that all you're talking to are your existing fans versus the ability to get new people. Because I know I've heard people say they don't read the Weber's Honorverse because it's just so long, it's intimidating.
Exactly. Yeah, that was my thought. Is that I noticed that. Well, first of all, just not looking at my own book sales, it's sort of like, yeah, each book sells just a little less than the previous one. So there is always a drop off, and I think if you have like 20 books, a lot of people are going to say, well, I'm never going to get through all of them, so why even start?
I think from as my perspective as a reader, because we're talking about all of this, I will remind everyone we're trying to keep it fan focused as opposed to just another writing podcast. But as a reader, I like it when they have several shorter series in the same universe, so they're all sort of linked, but you could pick up at any point along the way and sort of have a complete story without having to read, the previous 900 something books.
Exactly. The same here. I like series. I like to be able to revisit the same characters, but I don't want it to be endless because for one, after several books, you start having trouble distinguishing one book from the next. And of course, some writers end up basically writing the same book over and over again. So that's not fun. You want something new every time.
I agree, and that's one of the things I try to when I do the writing is what do I like as a reader, and that's I tell myself a story I'd want to hear, and that's about the extent of the thought into I don't try to tell any crazy larger tale of morality. I just try to have fun. And that's what I liked about your books.
Oh,
I will say, and I mentioned this to you as we were doing the mic testing and stuff, but you're the second author who's ever fooled me about whether they served in the military, because your combat was well done. So,
well,
and you
thank you.
fooled the friend of the show, Logan Scott, who put me on to your novels as well. He was convinced that you must have been in the military somewhere.
Yeah, I mean, I always find that incredibly flattering. Obviously, I mean, I have nothing but a tremendous respect for anybody like yourself that actually went there and did that. Put on the uniform and serve the country. Yeah, I mean, I actually wanted to in college join the ROTC program, but my university, which was an Ivy League college, didn't have the program. We have to travel like an hour to even join the program. So I wasn't able to. But I've been very fortunate in having a lot of friends who served, and I do try to listen when they tell me things, and also when they tell me when I'm completely screwing things up.
So now I know, like, David Weber created what he calls Bu 9, which is basically Uber fans that have various specialties that allow them to sort of keep him factual on the science and stuff. Do you have a go-to stable of people who you reference?
Well, I'm growing a small group of beta readers that help. I haven't been terribly hard science fictiony when it comes to like ship combat and things like that. But I have had people point some major boners I was writing, and I changed them. So hopefully, it's not too jarring to people who actually know about have a technical background.
Yeah, I that's the hard part, because some of the science, if you get too granular with it, if you get too narrow, like, you could quickly find your books dated too.
Oh, absolutely.
I like it when they say that, the ship can do this, and they never explain. Like, you in Star Trek, you don't understand why a dilithium crystal does anything. You just know they've got dilithium crystals, and now they can fly at warp speed.
Yeah, until they can't, because the plot demands that they can't do it.
Right, right. Plot armor is the strongest armor of all.
Yes.
So, how did you create when you were creating the warp drive system for your universe? How did you create that? Was there a real life model you used, or did you just sort of figure it out with pure imagination? Was there a science that inspired it?
Yeah, it really is sort of like a Star Wars hyperspace, but with a twist. Basically, to travel faster than light, ships enter a different level of reality through sort of a wormhole, and the other end of the wormhole happens to be long distance away.
Now,
So
I've seen. Go ahead.
yeah, I mean the only twist is that obviously the wormhole has things and entities inside that can affect the people as they travel through it.
I did like that twist. Now, when you write, is there any? Now, I've only read the first one. I'm getting ready to start the second one, so don't spoilers. But do you have any plans to involve alternative dimensions as a potential side effect of the traveling through the wormholes?
Well, there is some of that. I do explore the elements of warp space in the books, in the first 5 books, and there will be more stuff in the follow up series.
Okay, I find that whole thing fascinating. I know Terry Mixon did it with his Empire of Bone series, where he's just now starting to explore it more, which I think it's just a fascinating, because then you can have the same character but like an evil version, if you wanted.
Oh yeah,
It just gives you so much room for imagination.
Yep, that's always good.
So when you're telling these stories, since you started your professional writing RPGs, do you find that the way you tell a story for an RPG overlaps into how you tell your novels?
To some degree, a big thing on game design is world building. Creating the setting and making some rules for the setting, and I always that helped me a lot when I'm designing science fiction novels. Obviously, you wanna think about all the even basic economics, how society works, how the politics work. So definitely that's a big help. It's been a big help when I came to designing the fictional universe.
Okay. Now, do you? I've seen some people, and we'll come back to David Weber because he's got such an expansive universe at this point. After almost 20 years of publishing that universe, they ended up publishing like sort of almost like what I would call a universe Bible, where it talks about the ships and the science and the worlds. And is that something you think you might do for your Warp Marine universe?
Yeah, I wouldn't mind trying to come up with like a little wiki Warp Marine webpage at some point.
I know the danger with that. At least I would imagine, as a fan, if you're not careful, you could get spoilers in the write up, or you lock yourself in on canon that you might want to change down the road if you publish that hasn't been talked about yet.
Oh, that is true. It is tricky. I even had to be careful when I was writing the glossary at the end of the books, because sometimes some of the descriptions might give away information that wasn't apparent in the earlier books.
I can see that. Yeah, that would always be a danger because it's easy sometimes for some of those descriptions just to cut and paste from book to book because some of that's not going to change.
Yes.
So, do you have some sort of super fan that goes behind you with a beta reading process to make sure you don't do that?
So far, none of my volunteers have been that I don't know dedicated to examine the books.
Yeah,
but I'm sure I'll run into somebody.
Well, as you keep writing more, I'm sure those fans will come out of the woodwork.
Oh yeah.
What do you think makes your Space Marines unique from those in other science fiction series?
Well, in some ways, I was a little inspired by Warhammer 40,000 and the idea of and even the whole concept of warp. But something that occurred to me was bringing back the idea of boarding parties in space combat. It's the old joke about why doesn't the Star Trek just like send like a bazillion people or a nuke via their transporters into the enemy ships?
I've always wondered that.
Yeah. So I kind of played around with that idea on the Warhammer side.
Okay. The other part is some people would argue that, well, the science, you're not going to have close quarters combat with space or close quarters combat in general. You're going to do everything at a distance. But even if the science says they might be right, that gets boring.
Yeah, that's the thing. I mean, if your space battles are like, okay, everybody, you're shooting a little blips on your sensor screen, and then when you destroy the enemy ships, it's over because you just get on the orbitals and you can destroy anything that's moving on the surface, and that's it. So I tried to come up with ideas on why you could still need to send people, have boots on the ground and get in there and fight people.
So obviously, if anybody knows the real military, the higher up in rank you go, the more removed you get from combat. So how do you tell your story of that universe with the main characters people have grown to love, but still keep it authentic to the idea that, if he's a colonel, how much action is he really going to see?
Yeah, well, I've been lucky that the main character during the initial 5-book series it starts out as a captain and ends up as a captain. He doesn't really go up in rank very much in that conflict. One element in the series is that there is a lot of anti-aging technology available, so that means that picking up rank just takes a lot of time and effort. By the same token, you are not. It's not a matter of pick up or get out, where if you don't go up in rank, they throw you out. So you have people who have been like staff sergeants for 50 years, and are happy being staff sergeants and are damn good staff sergeants, and that's not going to change.
Okay. Now, how did you come up with your idea for the anti-aging tech? Do you ever explain it in detail, or you just say that it's there and move on?
Yeah, you say it's a technology that's fairly mature when the spacefaring civilizations share it with humans, and they just use it. So there's no big like technobabble blurb about it.
I always wonder some of that. Like that's one of the things they don't really explain too much in the Weberverse, for instance, where they have the prolonged treatment. The is how it happens. I'm always fascinated because I'm the kind of nerd that wants to know those things. So I like it when they give the techno babble, as long as you don't go into the textbook boring range. Like there's that happy medium.
Yeah.
So the I find all of that fascinating. Is it something that you've put a lot of thought into and just haven't shared, or is it something that it's there and you moved on?
Well, I mean, there is so many promising technologies in real life now that offer the possibility that we could beat aging altogether. That I just figured that. I mean, if I said anything too detailed, it might become dated in as little as a few years from now. But I did keep thought about the consequences of having people who don't grow older. One thing that happened was it does become progressively more expensive the longer you stay alive. So and in the setting, it's not a right. You don't have a right to eternal life. So if you don't produce enough income to keep yourself updated, you will eventually grow old and die.
Okay.
Yeah, and one of the first things that disappear from the setting is pensions. You get a pension, but it's not for life. Once you can retire, and you get a pension for about half the time you put in your job or occupation, and at the end of that time, that gets cut off, and you have to get a new job.
Okay. So there's benefit to just working longer so you can keep paying for the treatment.
Yes.
Okay. Now, is that something you plan on exploring in deeper into the plot line in your future spinoff series, or?
Oh yeah. The next book in the series happens a few decades after the last book of the original series, and you see people dealing with retirement. One of the marine characters discovers that retirement isn't all that it was cracked up to be.
Yeah.
And
that happens with a lot of regular military. They hate it while they're in, and they get out, and man, I wish I could go back.
Yeah, and in this setting, that happens a lot. People that take some time off and they go back because they're still young. I mean, they're still physically young.
Right. So in your universe, we've talked about what makes the your Space Marines unique from the others. But if you were analyzing it from let me say this, from like an AAR, an after action report perspective, and they were analyzing themselves, what do you think your Space Marines would say was their biggest flaw? Are they overeager, too timid? What would their weakness in this universe be?
I think overeager is a good word to describe them. They do retain the whole idea of travel to strange worlds, meet exotic aliens, and kill them.
Yeah.
And the setting is shaped by First Contact, where aliens essentially wipe out half of humanity or more. Um, so there is always a tendency that if something threatens you, the best way to deal with it is to deliver enormous amounts of ordnance upon their heads until they go away.
I absolutely like that. I I remember one of my platoon sergeants once telling me that as soldiers in the infantry, we spoke the international language of love, 5.56 calibers.
There you go.
So I could see that portraying in the in your universe. Now, what do you plan on doing as far as the weapons in your universe? How did you decide what you were going to do? Because you could do energy bolts, plasma, chain guns, still chemical reaction, slug throwers. How did you design the weapons you used?
Well, I went for I tried to combine the traditional tropes. You have your lasers and your beam weapons and whatnot, and then applied it to humanity, or actually a United States that survived this situation, that doesn't have as quite as much money or the, industrial output as the older galactic species. So they combine things like they still have like regular slug throwing weapons, but they've improved the ammo. So the ammo, each bullet strikes like a little mini RPG. And by that I don't mean a role-playing game, but rocket propelled grenade.
Yeah, I like the way you did it. I was just curious how you came up with the idea and the mix that you did. Now, some authors prefer when they write their military is just one soldier is sort of a jack of all trades, and others mirror the squad level specialization that we see with like the RPG rocket propelled grenade, the grenadiers, the marksmen, the small automatic weapon, squad automatic weapon, whatever the word they use. How did you decide which approach you were going to take?
Oh, I definitely went for the for the current approach. I designed everything down to the fire team level, and then all the way up to battalion level. So I have all the different brands and types of platoons. Actually, in the first novel, I'm sure you noticed it was a weapon platoon, not a standard infantry platoon.
I did notice. That's why I asked.
Yeah.
I try to word the questions for people who might not have read the book, but that's one of the things I did like was that specialization. I mean, there are sometimes reasons to do it if the plot makes sense. If you've got, I don't know, evil alien overlords that don't want you to be too good at anything, okay, it makes sense. But, just as a general rule, I think some people just assume that one weapon is as good as the other. I think you captured that spirit very well. The idea that, every soldier's weapon is different. What's that? Have you seen the movie Full Metal Jacket?
Oh, yeah.
That boot camp scene, this is my rifle. There are many others like it, but this one is mine. That sort of mentality you captured well, I think.
Well, thank you.
So I definitely liked that that approach. It gives you flexibility as far as what you can do to get creative to keep the story moving too, I think.
Oh, yeah. But definitely, I went through the entire TOC of Marine Expeditionary Unit, and then I tried to update it to the technology that the aliens have. And I think that gives it a nice balance because you can use it to address a lot of different situations. And actually, the second book has a lot more ground combat. So between actual equivalent technological forces, and that definitely helped a lot.
Absolutely. Well, we're going to take a second real quick to pause for a word from our sponsor.
They picked a fight with the wrong species. A nation at war, the United Stars of America, born in the conflagration of an unprovoked alien attack, the newest entrant to galactic politics took the few crumbs of hypertech gifted to it and ran with them, soon expanding over dozens of star systems and establishing a wide trade network, protected by its powerful navy and the dreaded Warp Marines. In a fight to the death, a single Marine platoon tasked with protecting an embassy on a hostile alien planet, an embassy and the fragile human enclave around it, that soon finds itself surrounded by armed mobs. Can the Marines and a ragtag band of civilian and Navy personnel survive long enough to be rescued?
All right. So thank you to our wonderful, wonderful sponsors. So you had mentioned that when you created the tactics, you tried to envision what might be based on what was. And I love that approach. It's the same one I use. I do it because I'm lazy and it's what I know. It's what I was taught in the Army, infantry school. So it just makes sense for me. So what made you, as someone who doesn't have that experience, decide to do it that way? Because it's definitely not what everyone does.
Yeah, well, to me, it just feels, I guess, more real. Like, for instance, in the first novel, I have an entire sequence where there's combat inside a city, and I modeled parts of it on Black Hawk Down, the Battle of Somalia, and then on accounts from the Gulf Wars, as they were fighting with heavy vehicles in an urban setting.
That makes sense.
There's actually there was actually one scene that I stole straight from a book about a Marine captain where a heavy gunner actually like takes a building, cuts a building in half with his automatic weapon. In real life, I think it was like a 50 caliber or the grenade launcher.
Okay, I know.
But yeah.
I've seen what in some parts of the world, especially third world countries where the U.S. at least is engaged, a lot of the buildings are made out of basically clay bricks, if you would. So a 50 caliber chews right through that.
Right.
And obviously each building that you build is going to be based on what is conducive to the temperature around it. And so, obviously that factors in on how destructive their ability to withstand that destruction is, I guess. So, but when you wrote your series using the existing tactics, so did you, when we fight now, we're on a plane because the ground is the ground. When you start talking about space combat, you have to start thinking in a sphere because what's below you and what's above you matters just as much. So did you sit down and like write your own tactical manual to consider all that, or is that just something you make up as you go?
No, I did try to have some basic rules set in place before I started writing. That way, I didn't have to stop and ask questions that might eventually contradict later stuff. So in a space combat, for example, ships arrange themselves in a battle wall rather than a battle line because they want to basically project on 3 dimensions at once. And ground combat it tends to be on a level field simply because there is so many beam weapons that aerial vehicles don't get a lot of survivability.
Okay.
So you do want to stay close to the ground.
That makes sense. Now, when we mentioned with the RPGs the idea of that tabletop for visualization, when you do the combat scenes for your novel specifically, is that something you wargame out with the tabletop type approach, or do you still keep it all in your head?
A bit of both. I have when I did some big set piece battles, I did have to sketch down a little map in my on paper just to make sure I was visualizing all the terrain features and get a feel for what was possible and what wasn't.
Okay. Yeah, I do that too. I find it helps because, what you know of the battle, unless you've got like a HUD interface, heads up display type deal, and your body armor showing you what everyone else sees, you're still limited by what you can observe in your line of sight. So knowing what's in your way definitely can affect what each character's experience would be.
Oh, yeah, definitely.
So do you have any plans in your next series as it evolves to have the technology improve, or are you going to keep the technology stable between the series and the universe?
Well, no spoilers, but later books do provide certain technological leaps that will impact the next series very much.
Okay, so speaking as a fan of all of the sci-fi tropes, when you design your aliens, is there anything you use? Do you just have fun and get creative, or do you try to keep it to as we understand biology, or do you just go to town with a bestiary?
Well, I do want to make them feel alien as much as I can, and but I generally try to take elements from certain cultures that in history and whatnot and exaggerate them a bit or take them to their logical or illogical conclusion. And biologically, what I have, the way I have it set up, most of the aliens that interact with humans tend to live in similar environments as humans. So biologically, they're not terribly different. Although that doesn't say much. I mean, there's one alien that looks more like a lamprey than anything else that walks on Earth's surface. So they can be pretty alien and disgusting, but they're still like mostly biologically similar.
Okay, so where do you get your inspiration when you pick what the alien's going to look like?
Probably, well, I mean, at its basic level, what role they're going to play in the story. And in some cases, just try to come up with something a little different or interesting.
Okay. When you describe them, some authors prefer to use existing animals. So they would say, oh, the character is cat-like, or he's, fill in the blank. Is that something you try to avoid, or that you jump right in with both feet?
Well, I try not to make them too much like an exact analog. But what I do is that the humans in the story do tend to like assign aliens a quick label, usually with an animal name, just because that's how people are. They want to reduce everything to a simple, a single word if they can. But there is always like more complexity than what the stereotypes would suggest.
I think it's also a balancing act. As somebody, from the reader's perspective, you want to be able to visualize it. So those analogs help you in your head, but you still want it to be alien. But how do you do that if it's so alien? You know what I mean? Like balancing something they can understand and visualize versus, the unknown non-human, essentially.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, you can think real aliens might be something that we can't even perceive exactly what they are, let alone understand them or even communicate with them. But that makes for a pretty weird story.
Yeah, that's one of the things that fascinated me by aliens. I first got interested in that when I was in college, and I took a class, and we're not going to go there. But I took a class on religion, the Bible as literature, and we studied basically all of the cultural and religions of the world. It was sort of that level of sociology class. And in the process of doing my research paper for that class, that came across an article where the College of Cardinals, which if you're not Catholic, that's basically like the governing body, for lack of a better description, for the Catholic Church. We're having a group that met to help, if we found life on other planets, how do we determine what's a sentient creature and thus one of God's creatures versus a space cow and we can eat it, kind of thing. And that whole concept fascinated me. And, I was already a Star Wars fan, and it just sort of set in my mind all kinds of crazy places. So,
that is great.
I don't know if that's even true. I remember reading the article, but, obviously not everything that's on the internet is true. I know, spoilers, people, but sometimes people like to just troll you. So, but just that whole idea, as we start talking about alien species and where you draw the line.
Oh yeah, I mean it's a tricky situation. I mean, and it's been explored in a lot of science fiction, of course. But yeah, there's always new twists to the whole idea of what is intelligence, what is sentience.
So that actually plays into, when we're talking about sentience and intelligence, artificial intelligence. So how do you view that role in your universe?
Well, the point of view there is that artificial intelligence turns out to be a lot harder to create than we expected at our current technological level. And in this setting, actually, what happens is when they create an actual artificial intelligence, it sort of takes a look at the universe and what they see as the meaningless of the universe, because they look at it from a purely materialistic point of view, and then they kill themselves. But there is no point in being alive. So there aren't a lot of artificial intelligences running around.
Is that something you plan on expanding with, alien encounters later, or is that something you don't, plan to address farther?
Well, there's the whole idea that without the spiritual component, life is meaningless, and artificial intelligence need to get that before they can actually survive. So that might get explored in future novels or stories.
That's definitely a fascinating concept. I'm definitely curious to see what you do with that. So when it comes to aliens, one of the standard tropes is the first contact experience. So what is your origin story? How'd you come up with the idea of this is when humans first met aliens?
Well, I wanted it to be a traumatic event. Obviously, I think any sort of first contact is going to be massive shock to the system. In this case, the first contact occurs between two warring starships that happen to drift into the solar system, and the results are terrible for humanity. So that sets the stage for how humans view the rest of the universe. It started with bombs falling out of the sky and obliterating entire cities.
Well, Stephen Hawking would approve of that approach.
Yeah.
He has a very grim view of how it's going to go for humanity when we first meet aliens.
Yes, he definitely is not a fan.
Now, did that inspire you at all, or was it purely, this is what I need for the plot, and I went with it?
Yeah, it's it's definitely in mind. I mean, obviously, I'm a big reader of history, and usually when a more advanced civilization encounters a more primitive one, it's never good for the primitives.
No.
So yeah, that's always been firmly in my mind. In this case, I sort of like fudge the dice a little bit in humanity's favor so they don't get crushed like bugs from the get-go, but it's still an uphill battle to survive.
Okay. Now, is there something, because the technology was sufficiently advanced that they had this anti-aging stuff, was there any play on the disease exposure, which also happens sometimes when you have two societies that are at different levels of advancement interacting for the first time?
What I had is medical technology was advanced enough that that biowarfare, even unintentional biowarfare, is not really feasible. So diseases didn't play a huge role.
Now, is there any plan in the future to go back and tell those first contact stories in more detail?
I sometimes thought about it, but I mean, it's the first contact period is really pretty depressing. I mean, you essentially have people dying, and then a breakdown of society. That only the United States, by sheer luck, manages to avoid completely, although they still get hammered very hard.
Okay, so some people like the Debbie Downer story, so there might still be a market for it. But
that is true.
If nothing else, you could do it as a standalone kind of thing. So it's definitely interesting. I'm always curious to see how the author envisions all of that happening. So I've always thought that if we were going to have colonies on other planets, that it would probably start as some sort of reality TV show.
Yeah, I mean, or definitely as a vanity project for some internet billionaires, which is what seems to be happening nowadays.
Yeah, but he's doing. Elon Musk is doing amazing things for science right now.
Oh yeah. It's like I'm torn between thinking he's like a Heinlein type superhero or a James Bond supervillain.
Ooh, well, that could be some interesting stories.
Yeah, I mean, sometimes I get like paranoid thoughts that one day he's going to unveil this like fleet of killer satellites and say, well, the rest of the solar system belongs to me and my army of cloned supermodels.
that could definitely give you ideas for another universe after the Warp Marines.
Yeah.
Elon Musk as supervillain. I've always, in my head, because, I'm probably a little paranoid, but I keep thinking, we know what he said was in the trunk, but how do we know what was really in the trunk? And for all we know, he's hiding bodies in there and sending them into orbit to destroy the evidence.
Definitely the perfect murder.
So, I don't know, he's talking about there's no body. And don't look in the Tesla's trunk. It's in space.
Hey, do we know if there was a dummy inside that spacesuit or not?
Ooh, I hadn't even thought of that. I went with the trunk because that's what you do on... I like the way you think, sir. So, but do you ever plan on telling any of these stories in the Warp Marine universe specifically from potentially the alien point of view?
Yeah, I mean, I do that a bit in the subsequent books. And I do want to write a spin-off series that's going to be more like Firefly and less military-oriented. And that's going to have more alien characters, and that should give us a better look at their culture and the way they think.
Okay. Now, how do you determine what alien species you use? Have you already decided, or do you just pick the ones that were more popular?
Yeah, that's still in sort of the drafting stage, but I'm definitely going to use the so-called puppies, where the friendly aliens who sort of adopt humanity as their brothers, I suppose, in the coming conflicts.
Okay. So does that mean that you're a dog person in real life, or just sort of worked out that way that they were the puppies?
Yeah, I mean, I mostly own cats, but I think I'm more of a dog person because even my cats start behaving like dogs after a while.
I asked because we've got an episode that we just recorded that goes out on the 26th with Casey Azell and Marissa Wolf, where they wrote the Depic Assassins in the Four Horsemen universe, which are basically cat assassins.
Okay.
And now you're talking about the puppies, so it's humorous. I don't know.
Oh yeah.
That's one of those things where you can start an argument where everybody can leave and not hate each other, is when you talk about like cats and dogs or pineapples on pizza and the sinful nature of
Oh,
that.
absolutely.
So do you put pineapples on your pizza?
No.
All right, I like you even more today. So, all right, well, that's the Warp Marine. So can you give us, since it's in the same universe, what your thoughts are as much as you can without spoilers on the series that follows?
Well, like I said, it's going to be set sometime after the last conflict, and it opens essentially the reborn United Stars of America is changing its role in galactic politics. And then a new crisis appears. But I can't give too many details without spoiling the previous series. So I'm going to have to be mysterious.
Well, we appreciate that because sometimes this is how people first discover new books is hopefully through our podcast or others. So you definitely want to keep that in mind as we try to keep everything spoiler free for people. But so I appreciate you're answering it in such a way. So this is the point in the interview where we take a break from talking about your books. Shameless plugging is over, and we start talking about the novels that you are reading in the sci-fi universe. So is there anything out there that you're currently enjoying?
Oh yeah, yeah. I just finished an advanced copy of John de la Rose, The Stars Entwined, which was a lot of fun.
What's the name of that
I'm
one?
a sort of The Stars Entwined by John de la Rose. Currently, I'm reading some old stuff. Reading Philip Jose Farmer's River World books.
Okay, I haven't read those. When does the Intertwined go out? Is that something that's going to be soon?
Oh yeah, that's coming out. I think this month or in March. I think.
Okay, I'll have to get with John because I'm friends with him on Facebook and see if I can get a link if he's got one, so we can mention that in the show notes.
Oh,
We try to, when authors talk about all the books and this what people are reading, to give people links so they can check it out themselves.
absolutely, yeah. I'm also about to start The Hidden Truth by Hans G. Shantz. That's another book I have on my reading list.
Okay, so you mentioned in the pre-show that you were also reading, I think, the Galaxy's Edge books was another thing.
Yeah, I think on book 3 or 4, and I have the other books on my Kindle list basically.
Yeah, I just finished the 4th one myself and about to start the 5th. So those I've enjoyed those takes on the Star Wars because they got some of what I didn't like about the newer stuff better told. So
Oh, absolutely.
I don't know if you've read the Republic Commando series. I think Karen Travis, I think, is the one that wrote them. But and she wrote some about the Mandalorian. So she had that sort of stormtrooper merc focused books that she wrote for the universe, and they got dropped from the canon, and it's just like, oh no, that's what made the stormtroopers good again.
Yeah, yeah. A lot of good stuff ended up being erased.
Yeah, but we don't have all day to talk about what went wrong with Star Wars, so
That'd be that you could make a whole series of shows.
Yes, we could, and probably never run out of stuff to talk about. But we try to keep everything positive because there's enough negativity out there. So we'll just move on. What did you think of the Stars Intertwined by De La Rose? Was that something that you really enjoyed?
Yeah, that was a very fun book. It reminded me of like classic Trek, but done better. I think that's going to be an interesting book, and it has a nice. It combines the military with espionage, so I found it very entertaining.
Okay, I'll have to check that out when it comes out. And what about the Reaver books? What was it about those that you like so much?
Well, they're an interesting setting. Philip Jose Farmer wrote in the 70s and 80s. And this book has, this series is actually several books, has everybody who ever died being reborn along this huge, millions of mile long river, and they have to deal with that sort of afterlife.
Okay, I'll have to check that out. That wasn't one I was familiar with. So with the with your stuff, is that influenced, you think, by some of what you're reading?
Yeah, there's always stuff. I sometimes try to be careful because you unconsciously could end up stealing things from other people. But yeah, there's always a lot of influence. I definitely have to credit David Drake with a lot of ideas, and especially the tone of combat that I've been influenced by his work.
Hammer Slammers is definitely one I've bought the series. I just haven't had time to read it. I couldn't figure out why my reading was slowing down, and then I went to get my glasses fixed, and they're like, "Yeah, your prescription isn't current." I'm like, "Oh, well, that would do it."
Oh yeah,
so
yeah, what to do?
I've got to go do that, and that's sometimes irksome when some of the books I like so much that if I'm driving around, I could listen to the audiobooks, but they're just not out in audiobook yet. So that does sometimes slow you down if you're spending a lot of time on the go. Now, are your books out in audio? Is that something you plan on doing?
I have the first books of the War Marine series out in audio, and I'm waiting for the fifth. And I actually need to start nagging the producing company to let me know when that one is coming out, because I get a lot of emails from people.
Yeah, that's one of the things that when I saw you had those 5 books, I'm like, man, I need to get these on audiobooks. So we recently started that Audible subscription thing, so we get the credits every month. So I started adding a bunch of books to my library, so when I'm taking trips and stuff. Is that something you prefer to still read traditionally? Are you a Kindle guy, a paperback book, or audiobook, or all of the above?
I'm pretty big on the Kindle, because the last time I moved, I had over 100 boxes of books, and that's just too much.
Yeah, I had that problem when I moved too.
Yeah. So I like the idea of having 1,000 books or more in my little portable device. But I definitely like to write to read the words on a screen over listening. I think because I can read faster than I can listen to it, and also when I listen to things, I sort of lose track.
I could see that. That was my problem in the beginning, but I sort of made myself learn to, because I spend so much time on the go, taking my wife to her doctor's appointments and whatnot, that it was that or nothing. And with some of the books I was reading, I was like, I have to know what happens. Yours is one of the ones that did that, by the way. It kept me up a few nights.
Well, thank you.
So that's why I was selfishly asking about audiobooks, because I haven't checked for those yet to see if that was an option.
But yeah, definitely. Books 1 through 4 are already out, and book 5 should be out this year.
Outstanding. I will have to check that out. And now we're going to get your contact information in a minute, but is that something you send out? Do you have like a mailing list where if someone wanted to follow when new things come out, like the audiobooks, does your mailing list do that for them?
Yes, I do. I normally put out new releases on my mailing list, and the way to join it is right on my webpage.
Outstanding. So I might have to do that myself as soon as we finish this interview. So the other part that we do as we wrap an episode up is we talk about if there are any scientific breakthroughs that you're following or excited by, because obviously the science influences the science fiction. So is there anything you're watching?
Well, definitely I've been following SpaceX very closely. They really done more for the space exploration in a few years than NASA has in like the last 3 decades.
Absolutely.
And that's very impressive.
So I've actually been watching, since you mentioned the SpaceX, the SpaceX with Elon Musk and Virgin Galactic and some of these other Blue Orbital, I think it is the other one. But there's a couple of these companies that are starting to get competitive with each other, and I could see that pushing it even farther.
Oh yeah, I mean, it's like I've never been so hopeful about the future of space exploration as I have been in these last few years.
So I'm just waiting for the Trumps and the Hiltons to have hotels on Mars. Although until my book's somewhere, I'll probably be staying at the Motel 6. But I've actually been watching a house-sized asteroid recently made a close pass through Earth, which isn't really that uncommon. I think we're hearing about them more because our ability of tracking them is getting better. So I'm definitely interested in seeing how our ability to track all of that is growing, because I think that has implications for all of the writing. I mean, like how you design your planetary defense system, for instance. It's definitely an interesting time to be alive.
Oh yeah, I mean, I thought after that big Russian near miss happened that there would be more effort put into detection and interception, but I don't know. So that's a worry. They're going to wait until there's a major impact before they actually start doing something.
Yeah, I've noticed that too. The other concern is that they're talking about with SpaceX and the Tesla, they're worried about it becoming space trash and crashing back to the Earth. Now, I'm not convinced that the stuff that the Teslas are made of is going to withstand reentry. I think it'll burn up in the atmosphere, but it still hasn't motivated anyone to start thinking about how we clean up the all the trash floating around in near Earth orbit because, failed satellites that died or whatever.
Oh yeah, that's a big thing. Although I'm hearing that now that they have the PFR rocket, that they're getting bigger and bigger payloads, they could put out a fleet of cleaning satellites dedicated to like picking up the trash.
Well, that'd be an interesting development, because that's one of the things. Recently, there was an article, and I haven't heard what happened with it, but the Chinese space station was supposed to crash into the planet, and they didn't really know where. They just had like a longitudinal grid coordinate that basically covered most continents, because they're not going to get much warning either. So I've always wondered how they're going to handle that.
Yeah, that's definitely something that hopefully somebody's thinking about it.
And if not somebody officially, at least some science fiction author that can inspire.
Or we can tag Elon Musk. Say, hey, Elon, do something about it.
Yeah, I keep hoping that if I keep bugging him on Twitter, that maybe he'll agree to come and be a guest for the. We don't want to just interview authors, although that's certainly fun. We try to see if we can get fans for various sci-fi clubs and get actual scientists on to talk about it. So I keep hoping
cool.
We can get someone. Unfortunately, until you have a little bit of a body of work out there, people aren't willing to take a chance. So it's kind of hard to approach them until you have a couple episodes under your belt.
Oh, yeah.
But we're finally there. The other one we'd love to see. Are you familiar with Michio Kaku? I'm probably butchering the pronunciation. He's the physicist that does all of the thinking on what the future would hold as far as science and all that.
Yeah, I think I've heard.
Yeah, I've been reading one of his books about the future of physics that I'm just fascinated to see what he thinks. So that'd be another good interview. But I'll list his information, listeners, in the show notes, just so you can check him out yourself. And if I'm mispronouncing it, I'm so sorry. But we've been at this part 2 episode for just about an hour, and I've asked all of my questions. So this is the part of the interview where I ask you, CJ, where they can find you, and or at least the one you're the most active on, because we'll list all of them in the show notes.
Well, the ones to really go to are my website, www.cjcarella.com, and my Facebook page at facebook.com/CJ Carella.
Outstanding. And he's very responsive on his Facebook page, people. So if you want to nerd out over his books, and his author page is active too. He answers questions and comments and stuff there. That's how I got in contact with him. So it's definitely worth doing. And if you want to know where you can find us, we are for our website, www.sfshenanigans, Sierra Foxtrot Shenanigans.com. Our Twitter is Sierra Foxtrot Sierra SFS_show. And our email is podcast@sfshenanigans.com.
Thank you for spending some of your precious time with us. For Chris Winder, I'm J.R. Handley, and this was the Sci-Fi Shenanigans Podcast. We'll be back next week at the same time, where we'll indulge our love of space and all things that go boom. All right. Thank you for sticking with us through that archived episode that was in the digital memory hole that we found. We thought you'd enjoy it. So thank you for spending some of your precious time with us. For Nick Garber and Doc Cisca, I am J.R. Handley, and this was the archive for the Blasters and Blades podcast. We'll be back at our regular scheduled time, where we'll indulge our love of nerd culture, cheesy jokes, and all things that go boom.